Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing a very overdue video, which is going through the best books that I read in the year of 2023, last year. And I know that these videos come out like December, January timeframes. We're almost kind of towards April, so I'm very late on this. But if you haven't seen previous videos with kind of like a personal life update, just, have not been uploading as much. So I thought it was better to get around to it eventually than just never get around to it at all. So here it is, better late than never. So I'm gonna go through all of the 5-star reads that I had last year, and that'll kind of be the way that I'm recapping to you all what the best books were that I read. So we're gonna go in chronological order with some few exceptions. So the first 5-star book that I read last year was The Cuckoo by Leo Carew. This was the third and final book to the Under the Northern Sky trilogy, which is a highly underrated fantasy series in my opinion. And I remember reading this trilogy, starting with The Wolf, enjoying it. I liked it. It was 4 stars. I thought it was good. It had a lot of things that I liked, but it wasn't perfect. I wasn't super invested in the characters yet. And The Spider, the second book, improved upon a lot of the weaknesses that the first book had. And I really started to feel a lot more of that investment in the characters. And so by the time I got to The Cuckoo, I had gone from a 4-star book to The Spider being 4.5 to The Cuckoo being 5 stars. One of my favorite conclusions to a trilogy, and I think it's probably going to have mixed reactions because it's not necessarily the most how should I say this not the most typical ending to a fantasy series that I've seen, but I loved what it had to say, and I loved how it just fit kind of the overall tone and setting and kind of foreshadowing that this trilogy had set up. If you don't know anything about the Under the Northern Sky trilogy, it is kind of it's almost historical fantasy where it feels very much grounded in reality with a few exceptions, and it's kind of an alternative history where it's asking what if Neanderthals had kind of evolved alongside Homo sapiens, and so you kind of had these two races of species, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, and they were kind of at war with each other. And what would that look like? And it had really interesting kind of commentary on socio-economic kind of implications of this, and like very political kind of military maneuvering that was spread throughout this. It was just so interesting in so many ways and so unlike anything I had read before, and I just loved it. And I loved that neither side was really the right or the wrong side. Each side kind of in any war had its justifications and did horrible things, but then also did good things. And so you didn't really have a side that you were like, okay, this is the good guy. So it was really interesting seeing that kind of morally gray status of all of the characters that you were following. And I just loved it. I loved the conclusion. I thought it was just knocked it out of the park. It took a lot of twists and turns that I wasn't expecting. And I remember it was a huge book and I read it so quickly because I couldn't stop reading it. It was so good. So that was definitely my first 5-star read. And I talked about that for a while, so we're gonna quickly move on to the next couple of 5-star reads that I had. I'm gonna group them all together even though I didn't read them back to back. And that's Knight's Shadow, Saint's Blood, and what's the 4th book called? Tyrant's Throne by Sebastian de Castell, which is books 2, 3, and 4 to the Greatcoats series. And this series is definitely one of my favorites of all time. I absolutely love the characters. I love the choreography of the fight scenes. I love the writing style and the politics of the world. It was just so good. It's sold as kind of a swashbuckling fantasy adventure, but I do think that does the series a little bit of discredit, because I want to make sure that if you're going to read this, you know that it's not all fun and games. There is some very, very, very dark and heavy stuff that happens throughout the series, some very, very difficult things to read throughout this series, but the way that Sebastian de Castell handles those things and then kind of balances it with still having these moments of kind of humor and hopefulness and triumph. It's really, really well done. It's what I love fantasy for. I loved escaping into this world every time I picked it up, and I just thought that the characters were fantastic and their banter and dynamics with each other were amazing. So Greatcoats is definitely a favorite, and I'm so glad that I finished that series last year. It was so good. And then the next 5-star book I read was Trust of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. That one, upon reflection, I don't know if this, like, looking back, still feels like a 5-star read. It feels a little bit more like a 4.5, where at the time I had so much fun with it. It was such a different kind of reading experience that I had from Sanderson, where the narrator of the story is, if you've read any Cosmere books, you kind of know who this narrator is, and he has a very quirky kind of voice. And so he's breaking the fourth wall with the reader a lot, and some of the humor is very like hit or miss. Like, either Sanderson's humor is going to work for you or it's not. But it really worked for me, and I had so much fun with it. I thought it was such a just fun adventure, very Princess Bride inspiration. But upon reflection, I just don't know if I like felt so overly invested in like the journey part of the story. This is following a girl named Tress who is in love with a prince, and that prince ends up getting stolen away by this witch, and she is going on this adventure for the first time, kind of leaving her home and traveling across this world to save him. And the world building's super cool. The magic in it is super unique, of course, as kind of Sanderson's signature style is. His magic is always very unique and his worlds are always so creative. So that's definitely the same thing here. But looking back, I don't know if this still would get a 5-star for me. It was really fun while I read it and just very charming. So I'd still like highly recommend it. I still thought it was a fantastic book, but I don't know if it's still 5 stars in my mind. So that's kind of an interesting one. But the next 5-star is definitely still a 5-star, and that is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. This is one that if you had told me what this book was about, I would have no interest in it, because it is very much a gothic mystery novel with a hint of magical realism, and it is very much kind of written in this flowery style that is not something I typically am drawn to. But I don't know what it was about Roshani Chokshi's writing. It just blew me away. There were so many kind of sentences and moments and quotes in that book where I would just stop reading and kind of go, oh my gosh, what an amazing way to describe something. Like, just moments where I just was in awe of the way this was written. I loved it so much. And then the actual story itself was so intriguing, was so sultry, was so kind of enchanting that I just could not put this book down. It was so delicious, and I absolutely adored it. I adored both the present and the past timeline. You're following a husband whose new wife, basically he knows nothing about her past, and something happens to her family where they have to kind of travel to her home where she grew up, and through that stay, he finds out things about her past that kind of start to reveal who this person really is, and just so fascinating, so fascinating. So I loved that book. I loved every second of it. It's definitely one I'll want to revisit in the future because it was so deliciously enchanting. It's the best way I just can describe it. The next 5-star that I had, I didn't have a 5-star for a while after that, but the next one that I did have was The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This book is bonkers, and it's not going to be for everyone, because this book is definitely a thriller, but it's not necessarily the most twisty thriller. There are a couple twists in it, but you're not reading this for like the big shocking twists. A lot of thrillers kind of have that as a signature, and this one you're kind of clued in the whole time with what's really going on, and you kind of know like where things are headed, but it's the journey, like getting there, and the stuff that happens in this book, and just the way it puts you on the edge of your seat the entire time you're reading it. Unbelievable. It's just bonkers from start to finish. You're following a girl who leaves a 1-star review on this author's book, and the author gets in touch with her and tells her to take her review down, and she's like, heck no, I'm not going to do that. And stuff starts to happen at this house that she's staying at, and she thinks it's this author potentially coming after her, and it is so wild. It's so campy, and I just loved it from start to finish. I really, really did. But again, don't go into this thinking it's going to be like the most unpredictable thing. You'll be clued in on what's going on, but I personally, even though I kind of knew what was going on, I had so much fun with it. So much fun. So this is one I couldn't put down for a second. I had to, I think I finished it in 2 days, which is pretty unheard of for me with books. So yeah, it was a really fun one. And then after that, my next 5-star was The Combat Codes by Alexander Darwin, which was a total shock because this one, if I describe it to you, it will sound like a book that I'm not necessarily the most drawn to. It's a sci fantasy in a world where it's kind of this like post, like kind of nuclear war world where we've become so far into the future, and looking back, like the way that war was conducted in the past with the horrible weapons, like it's so dangerous to engage in war that way that nations have now founded this new way of kind of like combat where they have these selected fighters. They just put these nations' fighters up against each other to kind of like basically dictate the outcome of a war. And it's so interesting, the whole concept of it. And it's very like martial arts heavy fighting. And that's not something that if you told me I would have been super drawn to, but I loved it so much. And I loved the characters in this book so much. And there's this kind of like mentor-mentee relationship that I adored. And the main character that you're following, this main kind of fighter who's a young fighter who's kind of rising up through the ranks. He's such a great character to follow. I loved him, and it was just such a cool world, and I loved the fighting so much and the way it was choreographed. It was so engaging. So that was such a fun one, and I loved it. The one that I gave a 5-star after that, let's see, I finally read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and this is one that I had heard so many things about, and you know, was like, it sounds like something I'm probably gonna enjoy. And I totally understand now why it has so much hype. It's a more contemporary novel following 2 best friends who are video game kind of like designers and creators, and it just follows like their kind of friendship throughout these years of these ups and downs with their video game and their company that they found together. And neither of them are like the best human beings in the world. Like they both have their flaws and they go through very kind of turbulent times together, but it's really just like a character study of their relationship. And I just thought it was so compelling from start to finish. I like felt a lot towards their relationship and was just so intrigued by the dynamic. And then I loved like the video game aspect of it was super cool. So yeah, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, that was one that I can totally see why it got all the hype the year it came out, because it was, in my opinion, like really well written, really great characters. So I loved that one. And then I reread Mistborn Era 2. And when I originally read Mistborn Era 2, I didn't love any of the books. There were like, I think all of the books I ended up giving 3 stars upon my first read. Besides The Lost Metal, I had never read The Lost Metal before. But when I had reread these, I gave Alloy of Law 4 stars, but then I gave Shadows of Self 5 stars. And that one, with all of the tie-ins to the original Mistborn trilogy and just all of the like action and reveals and character dynamics, I loved Shadows of Self so much. And like the mysteries that you're trying to solve and like the outcomes are so good. It was so explosive and so exciting and engaging the entire time. That was one that I enjoyed so much. And this kind of reread that I had of Era 2 leading up to The Lost Metal was so much fun. I enjoyed it so much more upon that reread, and that was a total shock to me. I wasn't expecting to love it as much upon reread as I did. And so when I read The Lost Metal, I gave that one 5 stars. I loved it. I thought that the conclusion was fantastic. I loved all of the like Cosmere tie-ins that it had. It was explosive and fun and engaging, and it had really satisfying conclusions to so many of the characters that I had now grown to love so much, and I just loved it. So I thought it was great, and I know that that one got mixed reviews, but I just really had fun with it, so I'm glad that I loved it. And then I also gave a 5-star to Nolan by Michael J. Sullivan. No one should be surprised because the Rhyria, not Rhyria, I mean, I love the Rhyria Revelations, but Legends of the First Empire, right behind me, that is my favorite fantasy series of all time, and Nolan is kind of like, is it several hundred years after the events of the Legends of the First Empire? I forget how many years exactly it is after Legends, but it's kind of like right in between the time of Legends and Rhyria Chronicles, and I loved it. I love being back in this world. I loved every character reference and every character dynamic, and again, the way Michael J. Sullivan writes his characters just works so well for me. I love it so much, and just me being back in this world, basically I knew I was going to give this 5 stars, and I did, because I just loved every second of it. So yeah, that is one that was not a surprise at all, and I can't wait to read the rest of the books in this kind of like rise and fall trilogy, because I hear they get better and better. So so excited. I love that world of Elon that Michael J. Sullivan has created. I also gave 5 stars to, I think, yeah, I did, The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson, which I knew was one of his more popular books that the people who have, I can't talk, the people who have read it absolutely love it, and I can totally see why now. It's short, sweet, to the point. It is a novella, and it's following a super interesting magic system, really cool character kind of at the center of this, and such a fun mystery and kind of like setup to this story is so much fun. I loved The Emperor's Soul. I can totally see why this is so popular. I don't know if it's popular in the sense that like the most people have read it, but it's popular in the sense that the people who have read it seem to absolutely adore it, and I totally get why. And I'm now firmly in that camp of people who've read it and absolutely love it. I thought it was just brilliant. So I love The Emperor's Soul. And then a surprise 5-star for me was Big Lies in a Small Town by Diane Chamberlain. I, again, like never would have expected this book to fall into the 5-star camp, but I had previously read The Dream Daughter by Diane Chamberlain and loved that book so much. It made me so emotional, and was like, all right, let me check out what else this author has written, and this seemed to be a popular one, a more recent release by this author, so I picked it up, and so good. When I describe the plot to you, it is not going to sound that interesting, but I swear to you, it is so good. You are following kind of 2 separate timelines, where in the present timeline, there's a woman who she's like been committed for a crime. She's taken the fall for a crime that's not necessarily a crime that she committed. And she's pulled out of jail to have this opportunity to like move to this small town and paint this mural for this small town's post office. And she has no idea why she was the one who was selected for this project, but she's like, hey, gets me out of jail, sure, I'll do it. And then in the past timeline, you're following the woman who originally painted this mural for this small town and has since kind of like disappeared. No one knows what happened to her. She never finished the mural, and the mural's like weird. So I think I forgot to mention the girl in the present timeline who was like the one pulled out of jail. She's restoring this mural, and she sees like all these weird things about this painting, and she tries to go digging into what happened to this original artist because of like how strange this mural is, and that no one can find the original artist. And it was so good. The mystery of this, and so good. And it got like really heavy at times, but I was so invested. And I mean, it did not sound like the most groundbreaking plot that I was gonna like absolutely fall in love with, but oh my god, I loved this book. It was so good. It was so engaging. The writing style, it was just like I couldn't stop turning the pages. So unexpectedly good. So loved that one. Loved how unexpected it was. And then I also gave 5 stars to The Diviners by Libba Bray. This is one that I think is gonna go down as like the wildest like turn of events for me with the series, because The Diviners I gave 5 stars, and then I started Layer of Dreams, the sequel, and I DNF'd it, and I'm like not planning on finishing the series, so just a wild turn of events there. But The Diviners was fantastic. It's a YA fantasy that takes place in 1920s New York City, and it's following a group of characters who kind of have these like paranormal abilities, and there is this really dark something happening in the city, and these diviners, these people with these paranormal abilities, are trying to investigate what is going on in the city that's causing like these string of murders. And it is so scary and creepy and horrific, and I loved it. I loved all the creepy horror aspects of this series. I loved the 1920s New York City setting. The character work was fantastic. So yeah, I loved this book, and I'm shocked that the second book ended up not working for me at all. But that first book was amazing. So highly recommend reading the first book. And I think that the first book stands well enough on its own that it's like a complete enough story that you don't have to read the sequel. So yeah, I love that one. And then I also gave 5 stars to The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, and this was so precious. I loved this. This was so cozy. It is a fantasy romance, but I think it's lighter on the romance, not steamy, and it is a story really about a witch who is in hiding, who has the opportunity to move to this house and train these young witches in their magic. And the young witches and the main witch and their dynamic is just so sweet and wholesome and cozy, and I loved it so much. And then the romance itself, I loved so much. And the main character, I loved her, and I loved the way witches and magic worked in this world, and just like the world building, I loved so much. It was precious. It was precious from start to finish, and I loved it. I loved it. It was so cozy. So I can't wait to read, yes, anything else this author puts out, because that was precious. And then I also gave 5 stars to The Last House on Needless Street. Oh my god, this one just hit me in the feels so much. This one starts out as, you know what, I'm not even going to try to explain it because the description on Goodreads is perfection. So I'm just going to read that to you, so bear with me. In a boarded up house on a dead-end street at the edge of the wild Washington woods lives a family of 3. A teenage girl who isn't allowed outside, not after last time, a man who drinks alone in front of his TV, trying to ignore the gaps in his memory, and a house cat who loves napping and reading the Bible. An unspeakable secret binds them together, but when a new neighbor moves in next door, what is buried out among the birch trees may come back to haunt them all. It is so twisty, so well written. I loved this, and my feelings from the start and how I felt at the finish, it was just masterful. I loved this book. I can't wait to read whatever else Catriona Ward is gonna write, because this was incredible. I loved it so much. And then I think this is my last 5-star. Yeah, this is my last 5-star. My last 5-star of the year was How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, which I know has gotten so much hate and mixed reviews, but I loved it. I loved it. Okay, important things to note about How to Sell a Haunted House. It is not necessarily about a haunted house, not in the typical sense. So if you're going in expecting a spooky haunted house story, it is not that. If you like creepy puppets, this might be more your vibe. This is also very campy, and it is campy on purpose. So if you're looking for a very kind of serious tone and like taking things seriously, this is not it. This is not it. And look, main characters do stupid stuff in horror stories, and Grady Hendrix is totally playing up on that. So if that would really make you mad, seeing characters not make the smartest decisions, this book will make you mad. But this is following two siblings who recently lost their mother, and they are now left in charge of selling their family home. And the daughter does not, wait, the daughter does want to sell the haunted house. The daughter does want to sell the family's home, but the son, her brother, does not. And so they kind of have this feud of whether or not they should sell this house. And it kind of, this leads them kind of on this sibling journey of discovery, of like finding out more about what this house meant to each of them, what happened in this house, and just a wild ride. It's just a wild ride, and I loved it. I loved it so much. And really, honestly, the first half of this story totally hooked me and made me care so much about the two siblings, the brother and sister, and their dynamic. I just really felt invested in them from like the setup and the first half of the story, that like when the weird crazy stuff starts happening in the second half of the story, I was just like here for it. Like I was having so much fun. It was so bonkers, wild, silly, but I loved it. So this is one that I think is either gonna really work for you or really not, and it totally worked for me. I had a blast with this one, and Grady Hendrix is known for his campy kind of satirical horror novels, and this one is one of his more outrageous, so I loved it. Loved it. So yeah, those were all of the 5-star books that I read last year. I would love to know what are your favorites that you read last year. Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!